The alarm had been screaming for 4 minutes when Vethka first saw him move. Not walk, move. The way deep-current predators moved in the abyssal trenches of her homeworld. Not hurrying, not calculating, just committed. Every part of the body already knowing the answer before the mind had finished the question. She had reviewed 47 hours of xenobiological surveillance footage before this assignment. She had read the full Sorvathi hegemony classification file on Homo sapiens. She had memorized the Death World Origin Addendum, the Persistent Predator Behavioral Analysis, the section titled, in the clinical language of the hegemony's taxonomic division, Anomalous Motivational Architecture. None of it had prepared her for the actual fact of him. The fact of him was this. Reactor Chamber 7 had suffered a primary coolant shear at 0340 station time, and the breach in the secondary containment wall was venting superheated plasma at a temperature that Vethka's electroreception told her was approximately 317 degrees above the upper survival threshold of her species. The emergency protocols had sealed the corridor. The automated repair drones had assessed the breach, calculated the structural parameters, and correctly determined that no mechanical solution existed within the available response window. Sergeant First Class Adeyemi had read the same assessment on the same screen. He had picked up a thermal patch from the supply locker, a flat square of heat-resistant compound rated for short-term contact with plasma-adjacent temperatures, which are designed for drone application. And he had walked into the corridor. Vethka's gill frills went dark. She watched through the observation port as he pressed himself into the breach. Not the patch. Him. He used his body as the backing surface, held the thermal patch over the vent with both hands, and leaned his full weight into the superheated seam while the compound bonded. The ambient temperature in the corridor registered as a thing her electroreception translated as catastrophic, categorical. This is how things end. The seal held. He came back through the airlock 14 seconds later. His left shoulder was burned through the suit fabric. He was reading the secondary pressure gauge on his wrist display. "Patch'll hold about 6 hours," he said to no one in particular. Someone want to tell engineering?" He had not looked at her. He had not known she was there. She was a new presence on the station. The Sorvathi observer assigned 3 days ago, officially catalogued as a xenobiological research liaison, officially present to study the human-alien integration protocols for the hegemony's expansion planning committee. Unofficial purpose: determine whether this joint outpost represented a tactical vulnerability, whether humans, in close quarters with Sorvathi technology, could be reliably predicted. She stood at the observation port and she watched the burn on his shoulder, and she thought, with the precise taxonomic apparatus of her training, I have not been studying the right variables. Her gill frills were still dark. She noted this. She noted it was the first time in 11 years of fieldwork that they had done that involuntarily. She filed it under anomalous. She moved to the next field. She did not move to the next field. The station around her hummed its familiar low frequencies. The reactor still cycling despite the breach. The ventilation pushing recycled air through ducts that always carried trace amounts of carbon polymer and something the humans had identified as coffee residue, but which Vethka's electroreception categorized as stimulant compound, airborne, neurologically active in 94% of tested species, concentration currently non-lethal. The emergency lighting pulsed amber. Down the corridor, she could hear 2 humans talking to each other in the fast, elliptical shorthand they used under pressure. Full sentences compressed to 3 words, Art, then 1. Then a shared laugh that had no tactical relevance whatsoever. She had documented 42 instances of humans laughing during emergencies in the past 3 days. She had not yet found the correct classification for it. Adeyemi was at the comm panel, relaying the breach status to engineering, his voice carrying the same register it had carried when he'd told her this morning that the station's meal synthesizer had malfunctioned and there were real eggs available if she ate anything protein adjacent. He spoke to catastrophe the way her species spoke to administrative paperwork, as if the events of the universe were a series of items requiring processing, not a series of threats requiring fear. She pulled out her observation log. The hegemony had provided her with a standardized form. 42 fields. She had been filling it out dutifully for 3 days. She opened to a new page. She wrote, "Subject entered lethal thermal environment without biological justification. Seal achieved. Subject sustained injury. Subject did not report injury. Subject continued task." Subject laughed. She stared at what she had written. She crossed out "without biological justification." She wrote, "Justification currently unclassified." She put the log away. At the end of the corridor, Adeyemi was now accepting a meal container from another human. The medic, Dr. Nowak, who had apparently not noticed the shoulder burn either, or had noticed it and made some Homo sapiens calculation that placed handing him food above treating the wound. He was eating whatever it was with his unburned arm and talking. Still talking. Veth Ka's electroreception, calibrated as it was to read the emotional charge in living tissue, told her that his biometric stress profile had returned to baseline within approximately 90 seconds of the breach seal. 90 seconds. She had once documented a Sorvathi deepwater specialist who had spent 4 tidal cycles in recovery following a pressure incident 1/3 as severe. She closed her observation panel. She went to her quarters. She sat in the dark water tank the station had provided for her rest cycle, and she thought about the thermal patch and the 14 seconds and the 90-second stress recovery. And she thought about the classification field she had left blank. And she thought, to observe is to remain unchanged. Her gill frills pulsed once. Violet. Involuntary. She filed that too. Under anomalous. No, she was beginning to suspect that was not the right field. The station ran on a 24-hour cycle calibrated to Earth time, which Veth Ka found philosophically aggressive. Her species kept tidal cycles. Time measured in the rhythm of a world that was mostly ocean, mostly dark, mostly governed by the pull of moons that her people had named after the types of silence. The silence before something large surfaced. The silence when a current changed. The silence that meant the trench below you was deeper than your kind had yet mapped. Earth time had none of this. Earth time simply continued, relentless and granular, dividing itself into units that suggested the humans had looked at their own heartbeat and decided that was a good basis for measuring the universe. It probably was. She was trying very hard not to find this endearing. She found Adeyemi at 0700 station time in the secondary engineering bay, which meant she had been awake for what her body classified as approximately half a tidal cycle, operating on 3 hours of genuine rest and a great deal of practiced stillness that she had told herself was meditation and was actually surveillance. The shoulder burn had been treated. She could see the biofoam seal through the gap in his suit collar, where he hadn't fully closed the top fastening. He was eating from a small container. She had smelled the contents from 12 meters away, and her electroreception had categorized the compound as capsaicin derivative, neurotoxin class, concentration, significant. She stopped in the doorway. He looked up. "Morning," he said. "You're eating a neurotoxin," Veth Ka said. He looked at the container, back at her. "Hot sauce," he said. "Yes," she said. "Capsaicin. It triggers pain receptors. Your nervous system is currently interpreting that food as a threat. Yeah, he took another bite. That's kind of the point. She entered the bay. She told herself she was entering the bay because it brought her closer to the secondary cooling array, which she needed to assess as part of her official observation protocol. She did not examine this reasoning too carefully. You consume a compound that causes pain, she said, for pleasure. Flavor, he said. And yeah, also the pain, little bit. He offered her the container. Her gill frills went still. I will not. Fair enough. He went back to eating. You want to sit? You've been standing in doorways watching me for 3 days. So you can come in. She had believed herself to be conducting undetectable observation. She had the hegemony's full suite of low-profile field techniques. She had 11 years of xenobiological fieldwork. She sat down. I have questions, she said. Figured. He didn't look up from the container. Go ahead. She had prepared 37 questions. They were organized by category: physiological, behavioral, cultural, tactical. She had a specific order. She had anticipated follow-up branches. She said, "Why did you go into the breach yourself?" He shrugged the unburned shoulder. Patch needed backing. Drones couldn't do it. I could. The temperature was lethal. For about 30 seconds, yeah. I could handle 30 seconds. How did you know you could handle 30 seconds? He thought about this. Not long. A human pause, which she was learning meant 2 to 3 seconds, which was nothing like the contemplative silences her species used, which ran to minutes. Experience, he said. Done it before. You have sealed plasma breaches with your body before. Similar enough. Another bite. Callisto Station's not the worst I've seen. She wanted very much to ask what was worse. She did not ask. She was not sure she wanted the answer. The burn, she said instead. What about it? You did not report it. Reported the breach. Not the injury to your person. He looked at the biofoam seal on his shoulder, as if he was genuinely re-encountering it for the first time. It's fine, he said. Nowak got it. It was not fine when it occurred. It was manageable when it occurred. That's different. He finished the container, set it aside, looked at her with the particular quality of attention humans gave to things they were genuinely curious about. Direct, open, not performing at all, which she found deeply disorienting because her species gave attention in layers, always measuring what was being given versus what was being withheld. He was not withholding. She didn't know what to do with that. You writing all this down? He said. Yes, she said, because lying seemed like more effort. Good. He stood. Come on. I need to check the tertiary coupling. You can observe. She followed him. She told herself she was following him because the tertiary coupling was relevant to the reactor integrity assessment she needed to complete for her official report. She told herself this all the way down the corridor. Or in the coupling access shaft, a narrow space that required him to fold himself somewhat improbably, given that he was built on a scale that she was beginning to understand was not exceptional for his species, just characteristic. He handed her a monitoring device without asking whether she knew how to read it. She did know how to read it. She said nothing. She held the device and she watched him work. His hands were precise. Not graceful. There was nothing graceful about the scarring on his knuckles or the way he sometimes favored his right wrist, which her electroreception told her had been broken and rehealed at least twice, possibly 3 times. But precise. He knew the equipment the way she knew ocean currents, not by thinking about it, by having moved through it long enough that the knowledge had become physical. You're running biometrics on me. he said. He didn't say it like an accusation. Her electroreception. She had forgotten that he had been briefed on Sorvathi's sensory modalities. Yes, she said again. What's it telling you? She considered. Your right wrist has been fractured multiple times. 3, he said. 2 combat, 1 maintenance accident. It healed incorrectly the second time. Yeah, said it myself. Field conditions. He kept working. Still works, though. She thought about this. A bone, broken and self-repaired in field conditions, functioning across subsequent fractures, continuing to serve its purpose decades later. Her species' bones did not heal strongly at the break point. They healed adequately. Functional, but the break remained a vulnerability, a seam in a hull, not a weld. Human bones, she said, may heal stronger at the fracture site. Yep. The third fracture would have been harder to achieve than the first. He glanced at her. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, not quite surprise. Something between them that she didn't have a word for. I never thought about it that way, he said. But yeah, I guess so. She filed this. She filed it very carefully. She noted that she was filing it in a different section than the anomalous behaviors, in a section she did not yet have a name for. And she noted that she did not find this as alarming as she probably should have. The coupling check took 40 minutes. She held the monitoring device the whole time. When they were done, he took it back without comment, and they walked back through the amber-lit corridor together, and neither of them said anything. And her electroreception told her that his baseline stress profile was calm, comfortable, at rest. She checked her own. She was calm too. She filed that, very carefully, under the unnamed section. She thought, to observe is to remain unchanged. She thought about the tidal cycles her people used to measure time. The silence before something large surfaced. The silence when a current changed. The silence that meant the trench below you was deeper than your kind had yet mapped. On the 4th day, Veth-Ka learned about Earth. Not the classification data. She had the classification data. Class 12 Death World designation, active tectonic plates. Magnetosphere generated by a molten iron core, a detail that still seemed to her like a planetary design choice made by something with no regard for survivability. An oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere, technically constituting a slow oxidation process that her species would have evacuated from immediately. Mean surface temperatures ranging from lethal cold to lethal hot, with a narrow band of habitability requiring constant metabolic compensation. She had the data. She had not had him explain it. They were in the observation lounge, neutral territory, equidistant from both the human crew quarters and her water tank, chosen by some unspoken negotiation she hadn't noticed them conducting. He had a mug of the coffee compound. She had a membrane filter over her gill frills because the recycled air always tasted of too many metabolisms at once, which was fine, which she had adapted to, which she was not still finding faintly overwhelming after 4 days. I want to understand the Death World classification, she said. He turned the mug in his hands. He had a habit of doing this, holding objects and rotating them slowly, as if thinking required physical accompaniment. What specifically? The gravity, she said. 1G is significantly above Sorvathi homeworld standard. You developed in it. Yep. Your musculature compensates automatically. More or less. You don't notice it. He considered. About like how you don't notice the water pressure at whatever depth your people live at. We live at significant depth, yes. But we are adapted to it. It is... She searched for the phrasing. Normal to us. Right. Same thing. He drank. Earth's normal to us. Earth has predators, she said. Had. Mostly. Predators large enough to prey on humans. Sure. Lions, crocodiles, owlbears. Few others. He seemed to feel this was unremarkable information. You share an environment with apex predators. Shared. Past tense for most of it. We killed most of them off, actually. He said this with something that was not quite regret, but was adjacent to it. A flicker in his biometric output that her electroreception caught, and she did not know how to name. Which is its own problem. She processed this. Her species had not had apex predators in the abyssal zones for 3,000 cycles. They had become the apex predators, and their culture had reorganized itself entirely around that fact. The hegemony was, in many ways, the political expression of a species that had never needed to fear being eaten. You were prey, she said. Once. Long time ago. He set the mug down. But here's the thing about persistence predators. We were prey and predators simultaneously for a long time. Both at once. Your threat response has to handle that. You can't just be afraid. You can't just be aggressive. You've got to be able to hold both states. Assess, decide. He tapped the table once. We got pretty good at it. She thought of the breach, the thermal patch. 14 seconds. Assess, decide. The diseases, she said. Something changed in his expression. A warmth. You read the full file. I read the full file. Yeah, we've had plagues. Several. Lost significant population percentages. Rebuilt. He said this the same way he'd said I set the bone myself, not minimizing exactly, just positioning the information correctly. Not as catastrophe, as data about what followed. Your immune system, she said, with wages wars that would kill most species. Basically an active battlefield in there, yeah. He touched his chest, casual, all the time. She stared at him, at his chest, at the casual hand resting over an immune system that her hegemony files described as extraordinarily aggressive. Capable of targeting invader pathogens with learned specificity, capable of turning on the host body itself under certain conditions. You don't find this alarming, she said. I don't think about it much. Your body is... She searched for the right unit of measurement, found none in standard, reached for her own species language, and came up with something that translated loosely as the ocean floor, actively trying to eat the ocean. In constant internal conflict. Pretty much. He picked up the mug again. And yet, here we are. And yet, here we are. She wrote this down later, in the unnamed section of her observation log. And she stared at it for a long time. And she thought about everything the hegemony had classified as threats, and everything the hegemony had classified as safe. And she thought about the way her species had organized their entire civilization around never being afraid again. And she thought, we have been afraid of the wrong things. Not the thoughts she was supposed to be having, not useful to the quarantine assessment, not relevant to the tactical vulnerability analysis. She wrote it anyway. Below it she wrote, the human consumed a neurotoxin for pleasure this morning. His resting biometric stress profile was calm throughout. He offered some to me again. I declined again. She paused. I am considering not declining next time. She closed the log. She sat in the dim blue light of her water tank. She thought about Earth. The tectonic plates grinding, the molten iron spinning its magnetic shield, the oxygen atmosphere burning everything slowly. And the species that had grown up inside all of this and called it normal and looked up at the dark and decided to go out into it anyway. She thought, there is no word in Sorvati for that. For going out anyway. for walking into the void, not because you are unafraid, but because the fear is simply not the point. She would need to invent one. She filed this under the unnamed section too. It was getting crowded in there. On the 5th day, he sang. She had been in the maintenance crawlway for 40 minutes, not because she needed to be in the maintenance crawlway, but because Adeyemi was in the maintenance crawlway, replacing a section of secondary coolant line that had developed a hairline stress fracture during the breach event. And she was observing him, and she had long since stopped performing justifications for observing him. Her log was thorough. Her hegemony report would be thorough. She was not thinking about her hegemony report. The crawlway smelled of ozone and hot polymer, and the particular metallic compound she had come to associate specifically with him. Not unpleasant, her electroreception told her. Slightly warm, slightly salted, carrying the biological signature of a body that healed well and slept adequately and processed stress quickly. She had documented this scent profile in her log 3 times, and then stopped documenting it because she wasn't sure what field it belonged in. He was on his back under the coolant junction, on both arms inside the access panel, working by feel because there wasn't enough space to see what he was doing. He started singing. She had heard humans make music before. The station had speakers. Several crew members had personal devices. She had filed music under cultural artifact, probable social bonding function, no tactical relevance. She had noted that human music covered a wider frequency range than Sorvati sonic communication and triggered responses in her auditory membranes that she classified as non-distressing without examining that classification more carefully. This was different. He wasn't performing. There were no speakers, no devices, no audience. He was alone in a maintenance crawlway with his arms inside a broken machine, and he was singing to himself. And the song was. She did not have the cultural context to name it, but her electroreception told her the emotional charge in the vibration was warm and complicated, something between memory and satisfaction, something that had lived in a human chest for a long time before it came out. She held very still. She was aware, in a way she had not been aware before, that she was witnessing something that was not for her, not for any observer. This was a thing he did when he was alone, when there was no one watching, when the work was hard and repetitive, and the crawlway was small, and the only available company was the song itself. She thought about her own species' relationship with sound. Sorvati used bioluminescent display for communication, electroreception for sensing, deep frequency pulses for long-range signaling. On song, as a private act, as a thing done for no one, with no tactical or social function, did not exist in Sorvati culture. It had never developed. Why would it? What survival advantage accrued to a deep ocean species singing to itself in the dark? None. None at all. She watched him work. His hands found the fracture by touch. He continued singing. The song had a rhythm that matched his work, not by design, she thought, just because his body had found the synchrony on its own, the way currents found channels. He replaced the coolant line section, checked the seal, ran the pressure test by feel. The readout on his wrist display turned green. He stopped singing. She did not move. He slid out of the crawlway, sat up, looked at the green readout. Satisfied. He had the look he got when something worked the way it was supposed to. Not triumph, not relief. Just the settled expression of a person whose professional competence had been confirmed again. He glanced over and saw her. "How long have you been there?" he said. 43 minutes, she said. He nodded. No embarrassment, no performance. Get what you needed? Yes, she said. Then, what was the song? He thought about it. Old Earth song. My grandmother used to sing it. Don't know the original language. It's older than that. Something that came across with the diaspora. He paused. I don't know what the words mean, technically. I just know how they feel. I just know how they feel. She filed this in the unnamed section. But she found, reaching for the right label, that it had grown past unnamed. It needed something, some marker, some container that reflected what was accumulating in it. She reached for her species' language and found a word, Thren Sova. It meant, approximately, the evidence that a thing is alive, not the biological data, not the metabolic profile, but the specific, irrational, unmeasurable proof that there is something inside a creature that persists beyond purpose. Her species used it for ocean creatures observed in conditions of safety, animals that played when they didn't need to, that made patterns in sand when no one was watching. She had never used it in a field report before. She wrote, Thren Sova, confirmed present in subject. She closed the log and looked at him, at his burned shoulder, his 3 times broken wrist, on his hand still warm from the coolant line, and thought about a song that crossed an ocean and kept its feeling even after it lost its words. She thought, that is the thing the hegemony cannot classify. Not the strength, not the endurance, not the 30 seconds in the breach. The song for no one. She did not tell him any of this. She got up. She said, the secondary coupling pressure test comes back green. Yeah, he said. Good work, she said. It was the first time she had said that to him, and she had not planned to say it, and she walked out of the crawlway before she could file what it meant. On the 6th day, the station was quiet. This was unusual. Callisto Station operated at a low, constant noise floor, reactor hum, environmental systems, human voices from the crew commons, and the occasional mechanical clang of routine maintenance. Silence on a human-built station was either equipment failure or hour shift changeover, and she had learned to tell the difference by the quality of the recycled air. Today the crew was in a maintenance suspension window. Low-priority systems offline for diagnostic. Most of the human crew were doing what they did during these windows, sleeping, eating things that smelled significantly, conducting personal communications with their home planets through the signal relay. She had documented this behavior carefully. Humans in rest periods did not rest. They reorganized themselves around relationships. The communications were long. They were emotional in ways the humans expressed without apparent concern for who might observe them. The medic, Nowak, or had cried while talking to someone on the relay, and then immediately afterward made a joke to the engineer Ferreira that had made him laugh for an unusual duration. Veth Ka did not entirely understand any of this. She found Adeyemi in the observation bay, not sleeping, not communicating, just sitting. The bay had a viewport, a long, wide rectangle of reinforced composite looking out at the dark, at Jupiter's edge visible at the lower left, at the absolute nothing of the void stretching in every other direction. He was looking at the nothing. She stood in the doorway. He said without turning, "You can come in." She came in. She sat, not at the other end of the bench, but in the middle, equidistant. She didn't know why. She told herself it was practical. The viewport geometry made the center position optimal for observation. She was tired of lying to herself about reasons. They sat. The reactor hummed somewhere below them. Jupiter's edge was very large and very still. The void was what it always was. Her electroreception read it as an absence of charge, a negative space, the boundary where all the Thren Sova ended. "You have a question?" he said. He didn't ask it. He just said it. She had been holding this question for 5 days. "Why did you stay?" she said. He turned slightly. "On the station?" "You had rotation options. The duty roster shows you declined 2 transfers in the past cycle. This posting is, the humans call it, hardship assignment." She had found this phrase fascinating and terrifying. A category of assignment for places that hurt to be in. A category humans filled voluntarily. "You chose to remain." He looked back at the viewport. Jupiter's edge. The void. "Someone has to be here," he said. She waited. He didn't add to it. "That is the entire reason?" she said. "Pretty much." 3 words. She had expected more. She had branches prepared for more. She had anticipated discussion of duty, of career progression, of tactical positioning, of the relational geography of species integration, that the hegemony was very concerned about and that she had been briefed on extensively. Someone has to be here. As if the station were a thing that required company, as if the void needed to be sat with. "Your species does this," she said. "Stays, in hard places, not because it is advantageous. Sometimes it's advantageous, but not always." "No," he said, "not always." A pause. The reactor hummed. "You do the calculation, and it doesn't add up, and you stay anyway. Because the place needs someone in it. Because the people in it need someone to stay." He shrugged, the unburned shoulder. "My grandmother had a word for it. Doesn't translate well." She thought about translation, about the gaps between languages where meaning lived. She thought about Thren Sova and its inadequacy for what she was currently witnessing. "I have been documenting you," she said, "since I arrived." "I know. I was sent to assess whether this station represents a tactical vulnerability, whether humans in proximity to hegemony technology can be," she chose the word carefully, "predicted." He looked at her then, full attention, the direct, unguarded human quality that still destabilized her. "And?" She looked at the void, Jupiter's edge. "I cannot predict you," she said. "I have 47 hours of prior footage, 312 field observations, and 37 categories in my log, and I cannot—" She stopped, started again. "The hegemony classification system does not have a category for someone who stays in a hard place because someone has to." He was quiet for a moment. "That sounds like your problem, not mine." "Yes," she said. "It is." She was aware, precisely and without ambiguity, that she was no longer keeping distance. That somewhere in the past 6 days, the gap she maintained between observer and subject had closed, and she had not noticed it closing because it had not closed all at once. It had closed the way tide came in, measurably, one movement at a time, and then the observation was underwater, and the only appropriate question was how far you intended to swim. Her gill frills pulsed once. Violet. She did not suppress it. He saw it. He didn't comment on it. He looked back at the viewport. They sat together for another hour. Jupiter's edge held still. The reactor hummed. She did not open her log. It was, she thought, the first time in 11 years of fieldwork that she had simply sat. She filed nothing. She stayed. The hegemony fleet arrived on the 7th day. 3 ships. She knew the class, quarantine enforcement, capable of running a full station seal in under an hour. The kind of vessels that showed up when the hegemony had decided a site represented a liability. And the only question remaining was what kind of liability and what kind of solution. She received the encrypted tight beam communication in her quarters at 0217. It was from Fleet Director Voss Khan. her direct superior in the Xenobiological Assessment Division. And it contained 3 things: a classified update on the hegemony's current policy position on joint human-alien outposts, a formal request for her preliminary field report, and a sentence at the end that sat in her electro-reception like a depth charge going off slowly. Assessment priority: determine whether Callisto Station's human complement represents a species-level integration risk. Quarantine authorization, pending your recommendation. She held the communication device for a long time. Through the hull, she could feel the hegemony ships taking up positions, the electromagnetic signature of their quarantine fields not yet active, waiting for her. She opened her observation log. She scrolled through it. 37 categories, 312 observations. The unnamed section, dense now, full of things that had no hegemony field. The song for no one, the 3 times broken wrist that healed stronger. Someone has to be here. The moment in the crawlway, the hour in the observation bay. Thren Sova. She opened a new file. She began to compose her preliminary field report. She wrote, Callisto Station human complement presents no tactical or strategic vulnerability. Human Sorvathi integration protocols are functioning within expected parameters. No quarantine action is recommended. She looked at this for a long time. She thought about the hegemony, about her career, about 11 years of fieldwork. About to observe is to remain unchanged. The first thing they taught you, the foundational premise of all xenobiological assessment, and the reason you kept distance. She had not remained unchanged. She hit send. She waited for the weight of it to hit, the professional consequence, the end of her clean record, the thing you could not take back. She waited for the cold current of Threlvas, her species' word for the rational grief of accepting a correct loss. It didn't come. What came instead was her gill frills, all 7, pulsing violet in slow rhythm. Not distress, not panic. Something that did not have a Sorvathi name yet. She went to find Adeyemi. She found him already awake. She did not ask how he'd known, whether the station sensors had registered the hegemony ships, whether someone had told him, whether he simply had the soldier's instinct for the quality of silence. That meant something was wrong. He was in the main engineering bay. He was looking at the secondary reactor panel with the expression she'd learned meant he was already building solutions to a problem he hadn't yet fully seen. Hegemony fleet, she said. Saw them. He didn't look up. Quarantine class. I filed a report, she said, recommending against quarantine action. Now he looked up, the direct attention. You didn't have to do that. No, she said. I didn't. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once, not effusively, not with the speech about gratitude she had half anticipated, just a nod that meant received, understood, noted. It was, she thought, exactly how he would have responded to a pressure reading coming back green. Professional. Satisfied. Moving on. We've still got a problem, he said. Fleet director's going to want to verify that report. Yes? And the reactor's still running about 12% below optimal since the breach. He turned back to the panel. If they run a systems audit, they will find justification for quarantine regardless of my report, she said. Yeah. He pulled up the diagnostic overlay. So, we fixed the reactor. She looked at the overlay. She looked at him. She said, You said the patch holds 6 hours. That was 3 days ago. Patch is still holding, he said. Barely. He traced the thermal coupling chain on the overlay with one finger. We can stabilize it. It's going to require someone in the reactor chamber during the repair sequence. Can't be done remote. The reactor chamber. Primary radiation envelope. temperature gradient that, at peak repair sequence, he would exceed the thermal parameters of his suit. "Adeyemi," she said. "I know," he said. He said it the way he'd said I said it myself, not dismissing the information, just positioning it correctly. She reached for Threlvas again, the rational grief of accepting a correct loss. She found it wasn't available to her anymore. That was frightening. That was also. She searched for the word, found something new in the unnamed section. Right. Correct. The way a current ran when the tide was properly aligned. "I'll run the external coupling sequence," she said, "from the secondary panel. It will reduce your exposure time." He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise exactly, but close. The recalibration of a model. "You don't have to. Someone has to be here," she said. He was quiet for 3 seconds, and then the almost smile, not quite his full range of expression, but present, directed at her, personal. "Yeah," he said. "All right." They worked through the night. The hegemony fleet held position. 3 ships, quarantine class, waiting for a signal that was not coming. She ran the external coupling sequence. He went into the reactor chamber. She tracked his biometric output on her electroreception through the hull. Stress profile elevated, maintained, not overwhelming. The flat line of a person doing what they know how to do even when it's hard. The reactor stabilized at 0448. He came out of the chamber. She ran a full biometric scan. Radiation exposure. Elevated, but within recovery parameters. Thermal stress. Significant subsiding. Biometric stress profile. Returning to baseline. 90 seconds. Same as the breach. "Make report," she said. "Reactors at 96%, he said. "Good enough." "Good enough," she agreed. The hegemony fleet held position for another 6 hours, then received new orders and withdrew. She did not know what those orders were. She did not ask. She watched the 3 quarantine-class ships reduced to points of light and then to nothing, absorbed by the void. She thought, "I filed a false report. I will carry that." She thought, "I would do it again." She thought, "There is no Sorvathi word for choosing the correct, wrong thing." She added that to the list of words she needed to invent. On the 8th day, the station was quiet again, but differently. Not the maintenance window quiet of people reorganizing themselves around relationships. The post-emergency quiet, which she had learned had its own texture. Air that smelled of burnt polymer and stress hormones metabolizing out. Humans moving with the particular deliberateness of bodies that had recently been in danger and were now relearning stillness. She ran her standard biological monitoring protocols because the hegemony required them weekly, and she was 11 days overdue. And she had been avoiding them in the same unconscious way. She had been avoiding examining the unnamed section of her log too carefully. She did not avoid them anymore. She sat in her water tank with the monitoring display floating in front of her bioluminescent glow, and she ran the full assessment. The results came back in the time it took her to breathe once. She sat very still. She ran them again. Same results. She sat in her water tank at 0300 Callisto station time and looked at the monitoring display and thought, "The universe is not obligated to conform to hegemony compatibility matrices. Sorvathi reproductive biology and human biology were not cross-compatible. Every text said so. Every xenobiological assessment she had ever written said so. She had written the summary section in the hegemony's own Alien Reproduction Assessment Compendium, Volume 7, the section on Class 12 Death World Species, subsection on Chemical and Biological Incompatibility. The monitoring display did not care about the compendium. The new signal in her tissue was warm, small, distinctly present. Her electroreception could not look away from it. It was the strongest piece of Thren's sova she had ever sensed in living tissue. Something that had not existed a month ago. Something that should not exist at all. She did not sleep. She thought about everything she had filed in the unnamed section. Every observation, every small, irrational thing that had accumulated over 9 days. The 14 seconds. The song. Someone has to be here. The hour on the observation bench, Jupiter's edge, her gill frills pulsing and unsuppressed. She thought, I came here to observe? To remain unchanged? To determine whether this station represented a vulnerability? She thought, I am the vulnerability. At 06:30 she got up. She walked through the amber-lit corridors with the particular rhythm of someone who knows where they are going and has accepted that they are going there. She had the monitoring results on her personal display. She had the words she needed. She had prepared nothing else. He was in the engineering bay. Of course he was. I need to tell you something, she said. He looked up from the coupling diagnostic. His full attention settled on her, that open, unguarded quality. The thing that had first disoriented her and now felt like the most reliable thing on the station. She told him. She showed him the monitoring display. She used precise technical language because it was the language she had. And she watched his biometric profile as she spoke. A spike, sharp and immediate, and then a long plateau, and then a controlled exhale that took approximately 3 seconds, and then a return to something that was not quite baseline, but was stable and deliberate. 6 seconds total. Then he said, Okay. That is your response, she said. I'm processing, he said. The dry quality, on multiple things happening simultaneously, invisible from outside. Give me a minute. She gave him a minute. He sat on the workbench. He pressed one hand flat against the surface. The grounding gesture, the one he used when the data set was large and he needed to think without drifting. She had documented this gesture 6 times. She found herself grateful for it. How? He said. I do not know. The compatibility matrices are apparently incomplete. He absorbed this with the expression he got when a calculation came back unexpected, but the data was solid. The data was solid. She could see him accepting it, the way he accepted everything, not without reaction, but without resistance. The data was the data. Is it? He stopped, restructured. Are you okay? Her gill frills pulsed, all 7. Violet. Involuntary. Not because of the question itself. Because of the shape of the question, the specific, irrational, deeply human shape of it. Not what does this mean strategically. Not how do we manage the hegemony's response. Not this is impossible. Are you okay? I don't know yet, she said. It was the most honest thing she had said in 11 years of fieldwork, and it sat in the recycled air of the engineering bay, like something real. He nodded. He looked at the coupling diagnostic. He was quiet for a moment that stretched into something she did not have a Sorvati category for. The silence of a person rearranging themselves carefully around something new, making room for it, deciding the room was worth making. Well, he said, we'll figure it out. We. She filed the word. Single syllable. 4 letters. She wrote it in the unnamed section, and she looked at it, and she thought about everything it contained. The geometry of we, the way it assumed continuation, the way it assumed that the observer and the subject had already become something that was neither. There is still the matter of the reactor, she said. Reactor's stable. The hegemony will send another assessment team eventually. Probably. My report bought time, not permanence. He looked at her steadily. So we have some time. Yes. Then we use it. He picked up the coupling diagnostic. Not dismissively, his biometric profile still carried the elevated warmth of a person holding something large and new. He was still very much here. You should eat something, whatever works for your biology. She stood in the middle of the bay. She looked at him. She was aware that she was doing it, that she was not observing him, that she had stopped observing him, that there was no longer an appropriate field in her log for what she was doing when she looked at him across a room. She went to the supply cabinet. She ate. She thought, I came here to remain unchanged. She thought, the change is structural now. It healed stronger at the break point. Ready, she said. Yeah, he said. They went to check the tertiary coolant line, and she held the monitoring device, and she was very carefully not thinking about the new signal in her tissue, warm and present and impossibly real. And she was also thinking about it constantly, the way you thought about a current once you knew it was there. Not as an intrusion, but as part of the water. The second hegemony fleet arrived on the 10th day, and it was not quarantine class. She knew this immediately. She felt it through the hull before the station sensors confirmed it. The electromagnetic configuration of a corrective deployment formation, which she knew because she had helped develop the doctrine. 5 ships, mixed class. The sensor array that meant assessment had already been completed, and the next step was not review. The message from Fleet Director Voss Khan was not encrypted. Assessment priority. Determine whether Callisto Station's human complement represents a species-level integration risk. Quarantine authorization pending your recommendation. She read the message in the corridor at 0342. The emergency lighting was already cycling amber. Someone on the crew had noticed the fleet signatures before the official alert. Down the hall, she could hear Ferreira and Carlson talking in the fast elliptical shorthand of imminent emergency. She thought, Vel-Shan, her species' word for the threshold in the deep current beyond which surfacing caused harm. The point where the decision had been made before you knew you were deciding. She had crossed it 7 days ago. She went to the main engineering bay. Adeyemi was already there. Of course he was. He was at the tactical display, 3 of the crew around him, his biometric profile flat and elevated and controlled. The war state, she had learned to read it. The one that came from a body that had spent a long time being responsible for other people's survival, and had developed, somewhere in the cellular memory of that experience, a particular quality of calm. 5 ships, he said when she walked in. 3 boarding capable. Yes, she said. I know the boarding protocols. I wrote the boarding protocols. She looked at the display. If they begin docking procedures immediately, we have approximately 40 minutes. Ferreira said something short and hard. Adeyemi responded in the same register, and Ferreira turned to the engineering console and started working faster. Can you buy time? Adeyemi said. She thought about it. She thought about what she had filed 9 days ago, what the monitoring display had shown her 2 days ago, what the hegemony's own xenobiological division would make of unprecedented cross-species biological data. Yes, she said. 2 hours approximately. She was already moving toward the comm station. The hegemony's review committee process for classified xenobiological specimens is thorough. She filed the biological assessment exception. She included everything. The monitoring results, the compatibility data, the signal profile. All of it rendered in precise Sorvathi xenobiological language. presented as the unambiguous discovery of a unique specimen of extraordinary strategic interest. Every committee that received it would require sign-off from 3 others before action could proceed. Every sign-off would generate its own review queue, 2 hours minimum. She went back to the display. 2 hours, she said. Adeyemi nodded once. That's enough. He had, she realized, already pulled a section of wall panel from the secondary corridor. While she had been at the comm station, he had begun constructing something. His hands were moving. The precise, feel-based certainty she had documented in the crawlway, in the reactor chamber, in every maintenance task she had watched him complete. The object was taking shape. Curved interior, vibration-dampening material, thermal stability rating. Approximately, she measured it with her electroreception, the spatial sense that was a secondary function of the same system that read emotional charge in tissue. The right dimensions for a very small, very sheltered space. She stood in the doorway of the secondary corridor, and she looked at what he was building. She did not file it. She did not categorize it. She did not reach for clinical language or taxonomic distance, or the professional remove of 11 years of field work. She watched him build it. "We have a boarding action in 2 hours, she said. Yeah, I know. He fitted 2 sections. Checked the join. I'll be done in 20 minutes. She wrote this in the unnamed section later. Not as a field observation, as evidence, as the thing she would carry into the galaxy that she would be unable to explain to anyone who had not been in this corridor, watching a combat engineer build something small and careful and warm in the 20 minutes before a boarding action. Because both things were equally important. Because the future and the survival were not separate problems. Because he had done the calculation and arrived at both. He finished it. He ran his hand along the join, confirmed it, set it against the wall in the secondary corridor, sheltered from the main access routes, in the place where the reactor harmonics were absorbed before they reached the hull. Vibration dampening handles reactor harmonics, she said. He looked at her, then at the object. Yeah, he said. It will. A pause. It'll be fine. She thought, bones heal stronger at the break. Boarding team's weak points, he said. She told him. Everything. Her own species' tactical doctrine, the boarding formation procedure, the communication protocols, the places where regulation said move, and station geometry said not quite. She told him, and he listened the way he listened to everything, fully, practically, already building the response. They worked through the next hour and 53 minutes. Ferreira with the load-bearing geometry, Nowak with the pressure systems, Carlson with the communication codes, Adeyemi with the station's irregular bones, every non-standard joint he had repaired, into every shortcut the maintenance record showed, every place where the station was not quite what the blueprint said. The boarding team began docking at 0521. The review committee hold activated at 0523. The boarding team paused. Adeyemi said now at 0526, very quietly, and what followed did not take long. She moved through it alongside him. Her electroreception tracked his biometric profile throughout, elevated, sustained. The specific quality of a body doing exactly what it was trained for. And underneath the training, underneath the flat controlled competence, the warm baseline that never changed, the thing that had been there since 14 seconds in a plasma breach on the first day. The boarding team followed procedure. Procedure was efficient. Procedure had not been written for this station, this crew, this specific combination of an 11-year xenobiological operative who had written the protocols and a combat engineer who knew every irregular joint in the hull. At 0609, Fleet Director Voss Khan received a communication from her own boarding team citing a Priority 1 biological assessment hold counter-filed by 4 simultaneous hegemony review committees, which was procedurally unprecedented, which was her work, which was the specific bureaucratic architecture she had spent a career inside and had now turned deliberately, like a current reversed. At 0610, the hegemony fleet initiated withdrawal. She stood in the main bay in the amber emergency light, and she listened to the reactor humming at 96%, and she tracked the withdrawal signatures on the display until all 5 ships were points of light and then nothing. Adeyemi came to stand beside her. She tracked his biometric profile. Elevated, settling, the long exhale. 55 seconds this time. Faster than before. She thought, we are both getting faster. It's over, Carlson said. For now, Adeyemi said. For now, she agreed. She went to the secondary corridor. The object was where he had left it, undamaged, vibration dampening intact, the join still clean. She ran her electroreception across it. Reactor harmonics moved through the material and were absorbed, distributed, neutralized. It was well made. She stood in the corridor and she looked at it, and she thought about everything that had brought her to this specific point in space, in time, in the galaxy. The hegemony's deployment order, the observation assignment, the first moment she had seen him move. She thought about, to observe is to remain unchanged, the foundational axiom of her career, the things she had believed before she had any particular reason not to. She thought, I was sent here to study him. She thought, I did. She reached into the deepest vocabulary she owned. Not the hegemony's language, not standard, but the original Sorvathi of the deep water. Before categorization, before the expansion planning committees and the quarantine doctrine and the 42 fields of the standardized assessment form. The language of people who had descended into the dark, not because they were rational, but because they were alive, and alive things moved toward the unknown. Vethkara, the irreversible bond formed in the deep current. Not advantageous, not tactical, not a classification or a field in a log. On the thing the current brought when you opened your hands and stopped fighting the depth. She had opened her hands 6 days ago. She had not known she was doing it. She went back to the bay. He was at the coupling diagnostic, checking the reactor. She sat on the workbench. She pulled out her observation log. She opened it to the unnamed section, the largest section, the one that had accumulated for 9 days, and she closed it. She opened a new document, not a field report, not an assessment, not anything the hegemony had given her a form for. She wrote about 14 seconds, about capsaicin as pleasure and pain in the same gesture, about Earth's molten iron heart spinning its shield, about bones that healed stronger at the break, about a song for no one that had crossed an ocean and kept its warmth across generations. As she wrote, someone has to be here. She wrote in Sorvathi, and she found she needed words that Sorvathi didn't have, and she invented them one by one, and she thought, this document will be incomprehensible to the hegemony's translation systems. It will be incomprehensible to anyone who was not present for these 9 days in this corridor, watching a human press himself into a superheated breach because the patch needed backing, and he could. Good. Some things should only be carried, not translated. She wrote until the observation window brightened to first shift amber. She wrote until the coffee smell strengthened to signal crew waking up. She wrote until Adeyemi, without turning from the diagnostic, said, "You want anything from the supply cabinet?" She thought about the meal container, about the small container beside it that he always included without comment, about pain receptors and pleasure in the same gesture. Yes, she said. He got up. He went to the cabinet. He came back with 2 containers and set them in front of her and sat back down. He looked at what she was writing, not reading it, just acknowledging its presence with the same attention he gave to every repair, every pressure gauge, every green readout. She looked at him, at the shoulder and the wrist and the hands, at the gap between the extraordinary and the shrug. That gap, the exact width and depth of it, the place where the HFY moment lived for anyone watching from outside. He didn't know it was there. That was the point. She opened the meal container. Beside it, the small container of capsaicin paste. He had included it without fanfare, and the same way he included everything. The same way he had handed her the monitoring device in the coupling shaft and assumed she knew how to use it and had been right. She picked up the capsaicin paste. She opened it. The heat hit her sensory membranes immediately, not catastrophic, not lethal, just present, real. There. Across the workbench, Adeyemi looked up. Something moved through his expression, not the almost smile. The full one, the one she had 5 documented instances of, and which her electroreception read as warm, directed, personal, in a way that had nothing to do with tactics or strategy or species integration protocols. She looked back at him. Her gill frills pulsed, all 7. Slow and violet and entirely voluntary. The reactor hummed. The recycled air carried capsaicin now. Her contribution, on her particular Thrensova, added to the station's composite smell. Jupiter's edge held still beyond the hull. In the secondary corridor, the small thing he had built waited, vibration dampening intact, joined clean, reactor harmonics absorbed and distributed and neutralized. New. Impossible. There. She took a second bite. She held the heat on her membranes, and she thought, there is no Sorvathi word for this. For the specific warmth of choosing correctly when every rational system tells you otherwise. For the current that carries you into the deep and turns out to be not something happening to you, but something you were always going toward. She would need a very long time to write it correctly. She thought that was fine. She had somewhere to be while she worked on it. She had someone to be there with. The station kept its orbit. Callisto's pale face turned below them. The void held still and dark and enormous in every direction, the way it always had, indifferent, absolute, unchanged. In the secondary corridor, against the sheltered wall, a small thing waited. And the reactor hummed, and the coffee was strong, and the capsaicin was real. And 14 seconds had changed everything, and none of it was over. It was, in fact, just beginning.